It started with a whisper, barely audible at first, a rumor floating through the corridors of London like smoke through a dimly lit palace hall. But within hours, that whisper became a roar, a storm of disbelief and shock. Prince Harry, the rebellious royal, the man who left the United Kingdom seeking freedom, had just dropped the announcement that would shake the monarchy to its very foundations. He was divorcing Meghan Markle. Yes, the very same Meghan Markle, the Duchess who had captivated the world with her charm, her elegance, and her relentless fight against the media. But what had driven Harry to this point? What forces, private and public, converged to bring the couple to this unprecedented juncture? And most importantly, what does this mean not just for the royal family, but for the nation, for the Commonwealth, and for the millions who have followed their story for years? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For anyone watching from outside the UK, it might sound like another royal drama, a tabloid tale spun for clicks and outrage. But to those who understand the delicate balance of monarchy and media, of personal desire and public duty, this is seismic. Harry and Meghan's union was always more than a marriage. It was a statement, a rebellion against centuries of tradition, a challenge to the careful choreography of royal life. Their love story, once painted in pastel tones of fairy tale and idealism, now threatens to unravel under the weight of secrets, betrayals, and pressures that no royal manual could possibly prepare anyone for. It is easy, perhaps even tempting, to think that the world knows Harry and Meghan. After all, the headlines have followed their every move, from wedding bells in Windsor to the Netflix documentaries, to interviews that ripped open the palace walls for all to see. Yet, there are layers of this story that the cameras cannot reach, corridors of tension and emotion that remain unseen, private moments that reveal the cracks beneath the glossy exterior. And it is in these unseen moments, these private exchanges and hidden documents, that the true narrative of this shocking announcement resides. The timing of Harry's revelation is not accidental. Consider the backdrop. Recent appearances at public events that seemed polite, yet carried the weight of unspoken words. Subtle gestures in interviews, a slight hesitation, a glance that spoke volumes more than any script could contain. And then the media, always hungry for scandal, did what it does best. It amplified the rumors, it dissected the smallest signals, and it constructed an imaginary timeline of impending catastrophe. But while the tabloids rushed to speculate, Harry was preparing for something far more consequential than mere headlines. He was preparing to reclaim control over a story that had long been dictated by outsiders, by journalists, by a world that felt entitled to every intimate detail of his life. From the moment Harry and Meghan stepped onto the public stage as a couple, their relationship has been under relentless scrutiny. Every smile dissected, every misstep magnified, every word recorded for posterity and critique. And yet, despite the glare of public attention, the most dramatic twists were not broadcast in real time. They unfolded behind closed doors. Whispered arguments, long silences, secret meetings with advisors, and the ever-present tension between personal happiness and royal obligation. The public sees the polished exterior, the charity appearances, the red carpet moments, the scripted interviews, but they do not see the private fractures, the emotional turbulence that eventually brought Harry to the decision he made today. But why now? Why would Harry, the prince who seemed so determined to build a life of independence, make this declaration at a moment when public attention is already at a fever pitch? Some say it is the culmination of years of frustration, of feeling trapped between love and duty. Others suggest that it is a strategic move, a way to assert agency over a narrative that has often cast him as a pawn. And still others whisper of deeper conflicts, private revelations that may never be fully disclosed, tensions that have simmered for years and are now finally boiling over. What is certain is this: the timing, the circumstances, and the consequences are all meticulously calculated, or perhaps they are the chaotic result of emotions too powerful to ignore. Imagine the scene inside the palace as the news broke. Advisors scrambling, family members receiving cryptic calls, security protocols quietly shifting. The announcement was not just a personal statement. It was an event with logistical, political, and social ramifications. Every press outlet, Every social media platform, every newsfeed suddenly carried the weight of a story that was simultaneously intimate and universal. For millions of fans, it is a tale of heartbreak and betrayal. For critics, it is yet another confirmation of Harry's defiance. For Meghan, it is a personal crisis of unprecedented magnitude. And for the royal family, it is a disruption of order, a challenge to the careful choreography that has maintained its image for centuries. But let's not be mistaken. This is not simply a story about celebrity divorce or tabloid intrigue. It is about power, about identity, about the intersection of personal desire and institutional expectation. It is about a young prince who dared to break free from centuries of convention, only to find that freedom comes with its own costs. It is about a woman who has navigated a complex maze of public perception and private expectation, whose every move is scrutinized for signs of compliance or defiance. And it is about the tension between the private and the public, the seen and the unseen, the whispered and the proclaimed. And yet, amidst the turmoil, there are questions that demand answers. How did their relationship evolve to this point? What were the warning signs, the subtle signals that something was amiss long before the cameras captured it? Which advisors, friends, or confidants influenced Harry's decision? And perhaps most importantly, what does this mean for the monarchy moving forward? Could this be a catalyst for change, a signal that the royal family must adapt to a modern world where private happiness and public duty collide in unpredictable ways? We must also consider the human element. Harry is not merely a prince. He is a son, a brother, a father, a man whose life has been a constant negotiation between personal authenticity and public expectation. Meghan, likewise, is not just a duchess. She is a woman navigating immense pressures, a life under a microscope, and a world that often judges her more harshly than anyone else. Their story, though played out on an international stage, resonates because it is, at its core, a story of human vulnerability, of love strained by circumstance, of the collision between personal desire and societal expectation. And now, as Harry's announcement reverberates across the globe, the stakes are higher than ever. Every media outlet is clamoring for insight. Every royal correspondent is analyzing body language and subtext, and the public is desperate for details. Who will speak first? Who will be silenced? What previously hidden truths will come to light? And perhaps the most pressing question of all, is this the beginning of a new chapter or the unraveling of a saga that has captured hearts, headlines, and history alike? As we explore this story, remember, nothing is as it seems. The official narrative is only part of the truth. Behind every public appearance, every interview, every social media post, there are layers of context, nuance, and hidden meaning. And it is within these layers that the full drama of Harry and Meghan's decision truly exists. A drama that involves emotion, strategy, secrecy, and consequences that extend far beyond the personal sphere. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What really happens behind palace walls? What causes the perfect image of a royal marriage to fracture into whispers, heated arguments, and long silences that ripple through history? For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, it began subtly, in moments almost invisible to the public eye. Glances exchanged in hallways, hushed conversations in staff quarters, decisions quietly challenged in meetings meant to be private. It was a tension that had been brewing for years, a slow, simmering friction between love, duty, and the relentless pressure of expectation. Think about it. Harry, born into royalty, trained from infancy to navigate protocol, scrutiny, and public perception, suddenly finds himself confronting his own desires against a system designed to suppress them. Meghan, a woman who had lived in front of cameras her entire adult life, entering into the most scrutinized union imaginable, faces the challenge of asserting herself while navigating centuries-old traditions. From the outside, it may seem like a glamorous partnership, a fairy tale unfolding under global spotlights. But inside, the dynamics were far more complicated, charged with emotion, contradiction, and ambition. Sources close to the couple report that arguments became increasingly frequent, starting with minor disagreements over public appearances, where to attend, how to respond to press questions, even which charities to prioritize. These seemingly small decisions became battlegrounds, In a world where every move is magnified, these debates were rarely private. Staff and advisors often became unwilling witnesses to tension that grew heavier with each passing week. A simple decision about attending a gala could escalate into a confrontation that lasted for hours, leaving both parties emotionally drained and questioning their own choices. The arguments weren't just about public perception. They touched on the core of their relationship. Differences in background, upbringing, and life experience collided. Harry, who had spent his life understanding the intricate web of the monarchy, often approached situations with a long-term perspective. Meghan, accustomed to a world driven by media narratives and personal branding, sometimes reacted instinctively, prioritizing emotional truth over tradition. These differences, at first complementary, began to feel like fault lines. Small disagreements became symbolic, each debate over a public engagement, an interview, or a social media post was a microcosm of deeper tension. But it wasn't just about disagreements. There were secrets, omissions, and moments of withheld information that fueled mistrust. Friends close to Harry describe incidents where he would feel blindsided by decisions he wasn't consulted on. Meghan's inner circle, meanwhile, sensed Harry's frustrations and tried to mediate, but the palace environment was a pressure cooker. Every action had unintended consequences. Every choice carried weight far beyond the immediate moment. And slowly, the pattern became clear. What the public saw as a unified couple was, behind closed doors, a duo navigating a minefield of unmet expectations, miscommunications, and pent-up resentment. One particularly revealing incident involved a charitable initiative that both were deeply passionate about. On the surface, it was a noble cause, a partnership meant to highlight their shared values and commitment to social issues. But behind the scenes, tensions arose over branding, media strategy, and allocation of credit. Advisors report that Meghan pushed for a public announcement that Harry had not fully endorsed, while Harry felt blindsided by the timing and framing. The discussion, initially polite, escalated into a confrontation described by sources as intense and emotionally charged. Voices were raised. Doors were slammed. For a few hours, the palace corridors themselves seemed to hold the echoes of conflict that neither could fully contain. And it wasn't just disagreements over initiatives. Arguments spilled over into personal realms, daily routines, parenting philosophies, social interactions. Every perceived slight, every unintended comment, added fuel to an already volatile situation. Friends of the couple describe a growing pattern of emotional distancing. Small moments of connection, which once provided relief, became arenas of tension. Shared laughter grew rare. Conversations became tactical, strategic even. The emotional intimacy that had once defined their relationship began to erode, replaced by caution, calculation, and subtle defensiveness. What's perhaps most striking is how these private tensions were mirrored in the public sphere. While the cameras captured smiles, hand-holding, and carefully staged appearances, insiders report that much of this was performative, a necessary facade to maintain the image expected by the monarchy and the media. The contrast between public presentation and private reality created a cognitive dissonance that neither could fully reconcile. The more they performed unity, the more private tensions deepened. Every public gesture became a mask, every photograph a carefully constructed illusion. But masks have a way of slipping, and when they did, the cracks became impossible to ignore. Complicating matters were the inevitable leaks. Staff members, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes strategically, conveyed fragments of private conflicts to journalists and insiders. Every misreported story, every half-truth, became ammunition. Public perception, once a peripheral concern, became central to the couple's dynamic. Arguments that might have remained private in any other marriage were transformed into national headlines, dissected for narrative, dramatized for consumption. The stakes were exponentially higher than any ordinary domestic dispute, and the emotional toll correspondingly greater. Then there were the interventions, or what insiders described as mediation attempts. Advisors, friends, and palace staff attempted to bridge gaps, to negotiate resolutions. Some meetings were constructive, others, however, only exacerbated tensions. Reports suggest that attempts to mediate were complicated by conflicting loyalties. Advisors loyal to Harry sometimes clashed with Meghan's team, each side interpreting intentions differently. Misunderstandings multiplied. Solutions were temporary, fragile, and often reversed within hours. The couple, caught between external expectations and internal conflict, faced a relentless cycle of tension that showed no sign of abating. Underlying all this was the shadow of history and precedent. Harry is a man deeply aware of the family patterns that preceded him, the untold stories, the suppressed conflicts, the tragedies that befell relatives constrained by tradition. Meghan, as an outsider entering an institution built over centuries, was acutely conscious of the weight of legacy, expectation, and media scrutiny. Each felt the pressure differently, yet both were ensnared by it. What may have begun as isolated disagreements over small issues became emblematic of larger incompatibilities between personal autonomy and institutional expectation. And once such patterns take root, they are difficult to uproot. And then, in the midst of all this, came moments that were, in retrospect, chillingly predictive. Small disagreements that could have been resolved through calm dialogue escalated disproportionately. Private conversations devolved into arguments in which past grievances, sometimes years old, were resurrected and weaponized. Friends and advisors began to notice patterns of withdrawal. Harry retreating emotionally in moments of stress, Meghan responding with increasing defensiveness. The emotional feedback loop intensified with each public appearance, each interaction with the press, each perceived slight. What had once been a loving partnership now carried the weight of accumulated grievance, frustration, and unmet expectations. It is important to pause and consider the psychological landscape of this private feud. Emotional strain, stress, and public pressure can dramatically distort perception. Every argument becomes magnified, every comment interpreted through a lens of past conflict. And when coupled with external scrutiny, this creates an environment where reconciliation becomes increasingly difficult. Observers might wonder, how could two intelligent, capable individuals allow tension to escalate so dramatically? The answer lies in the unique intersection of love, obligation, and public spectacle, an intersection that few in the world will ever truly understand. By the time Harry made his announcement, the groundwork had been laid for a rupture that felt inevitable. Every minor disagreement, every withheld word, every misunderstanding had accumulated like snow on a mountainside, slowly building toward an avalanche. Those closest to the couple saw the warning signs: emotional fatigue, withdrawal, increasing defensiveness, but no one could fully anticipate the magnitude of the ultimate decision. It was a tension that had been quietly, relentlessly building for years, and the announcement of divorce was merely the visible manifestation of dynamics that had long been at play. But what really pushed Harry to finally make the announcement? Was it a culmination of private conflict? A sense of liberation after years of constraint? Or perhaps the realization that the public narrative could no longer be managed without transparency, dramatic as it might be? Sources close to the palace suggest that it was all of the above, and yet also something more subtle. A desire to reclaim personal agency in a life that had, for so long, been dictated by expectation, tradition, and public perception. The private feud between Harry and Meghan was more than disagreement. It was a complex web of emotion, expectation, and consequence. Every argument had layers. Every silence spoke volumes. Every decision carried the weight of history, family, and public scrutiny. And while the public would soon see the announcement, they could not fully grasp the years of tension, the sleepless nights, the whispered arguments, and the private despair that led to this moment. It was the invisible engine driving one of the most shocking royal revelations in modern history. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. How does a royal family react when one of its own drops a bomb that shakes centuries of tradition? Imagine the scene. Buckingham Palace, a historic building synonymous with pomp, ceremony, and stoic decorum, suddenly humming with an energy that is anything but calm. Advisors pacing the corridors, aides clutching phones, messengers running between wings, and the family itself, caught in a storm of emotions they had long prepared to conceal from the world. Prince Harry's announcement that he was divorcing Meghan Markle was not just news. It was a seismic event, a rupture that forced everyone inside and outside the palace to reconsider the delicate balance of loyalty, love, and duty. King Charles, the head of the family and the embodiment of centuries of monarchy, was reportedly stunned. His reaction, according to sources, was not anger in the conventional sense, but a complex mix of disappointment, concern, and incredulity. For a man accustomed to managing crises with measured diplomacy, this was a new kind of challenge. How do you respond to a son who publicly defies expectations, disrupts tradition, and unveils a private family matter on a global stage? In private, the king is said to have called for immediate meetings with key advisors, not merely to plan responses for the media, but to understand what had led to this breaking point. The conversations were intense, and the atmosphere thick with tension, as those in the inner circle tried to parse emotion from strategy, truth from perception. Meanwhile, Prince William, Harry's older brother and the heir apparent, faced a storm of his own emotions. The relationship between the brothers had long been under scrutiny, fraternal bonds tested by distance, perception, and past grievances. Some insiders describe William as initially numb, struggling to reconcile the public facade of family unity with the reality that Harry had just exposed private marital conflict in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. Sources suggest that William oscillated between anger and concern, trying to balance loyalty to his family with the perceived duty to maintain the dignity of the monarchy. The tension was palpable. Every word, every gesture in subsequent communications became loaded with meaning, scrutinized for subtext and intention. And what of the extended family? Princess Anne, known for her forthright demeanor, is said to have reacted with a mixture of astonishment and pragmatic assessment. She reportedly reminded advisors of the long-term implications, stressing that the royal family's public image was at stake and that private resolution needed to happen fast. Other members, including cousins and more distant royals, found themselves thrust into advisory roles they neither sought nor were fully equipped to handle. Every conversation was a negotiation, every statement a strategic calculation, and the emotional stakes were higher than many could articulate. Perhaps the most intriguing dynamic, however, was not just within the family itself, but in the interface between family and institution. Advisors, palace staff, and legal experts scrambled to understand the potential ramifications of Harry's announcement. Social media was already exploding with speculation, news channels were broadcasting live updates, and journalists were lining up with every shred of information they could obtain. What had been a private decision, carefully considered behind closed doors, became a public spectacle within moments. The royal family now faced the delicate task of responding without exacerbating tension, without appearing fractured, and without letting the narrative slip entirely into Harry and Meghan's hands. Sources close to the palace report that in the immediate aftermath, emergency meetings were held in the state apartments. Key advisors discussed media strategy, public messaging, and potential legal consequences. One aide, speaking on condition of anonymity, described the mood as a mixture of disbelief, worry, and urgency. The advisors recognized that how the family responded could define the monarchy's image for years, perhaps decades. Every decision, from press statements to personal appearances, carried weight far beyond the immediate scandal. It was not merely a divorce announcement. It was a potential pivot point in the monarchy's modern history. Amid this, tension between family members themselves became apparent. Some relatives reportedly advocated for private dialogue, urging Harry and Meghan to negotiate away from the media glare. Others, frustrated by repeated breaches of protocol, argued for public statements to assert control over the narrative. These internal debates were intense and, according to insiders, occasionally heated. Loyalty, perception, and self-interest collided, revealing cracks in the facade of unity. The family, while bound by blood and tradition, was suddenly navigating treacherous waters where each move could be interpreted as either support, opposition, or indifference. Interestingly, the royal family's reaction was not uniform. Some members reached out to Harry personally, attempting to offer reassurance or guidance, while others remained distant, concerned that direct engagement might complicate matters. In private conversations, Harry reportedly expressed a desire for autonomy, a need to control his own narrative, and frustration with the constraints imposed by tradition. This tension between personal freedom and family expectation, so central to the unfolding drama, was now mirrored in every interaction within the palace, creating a complex web of emotion and strategy. The press, of course, immediately caught wind of every nuanced reaction. Leaks, whether intentional or accidental, fueled speculation and heightened the sense of drama. Headlines splashed across screens, framing the family's internal responses as both conflict and strategy. In some cases, journalists reported on body language observed during official appearances, interpreting subtle gestures as coded communication. A handshake too brief, a smile too forced, a glance suggesting disapproval. The public, already invested in the narrative of Harry and Meghan, consumed these reports ravenously, adding a layer of pressure that the family had to navigate carefully. Even more, there were reports of clandestine meetings, late-night strategy sessions, and secure communications between family members attempting to manage the crisis. Advisors consulted legal teams, public relations experts, and internal historians to understand the long-term implications. Questions abounded. How should statements be phrased? How much transparency is necessary? What precedents exist for such a public marital split within the monarchy? Each question carried emotional weight, practical concern, and historical significance. The family's reaction, it became clear, was not just about handling a single event, but about preserving centuries of reputation, legitimacy, and authority. And yet, despite the strategic maneuvering, emotion remained central. Sources indicate that private calls between Harry and his father were emotionally charged, a mixture of love, frustration, and misunderstanding. The king reportedly tried to appeal to Harry's sense of duty, reminding him of public responsibilities and familial obligations. Harry, in turn, expressed a deep need for personal agency, a desire to break free from constraints that had weighed on him since childhood. These conversations, though private, illuminate the heart of the royal dilemma: how to reconcile human emotion with institutional expectation when every personal choice is public property. Another layer of complexity came from the palace staff, who found themselves in the impossible position of mediator and observer. Staff members, many of whom have worked for decades, were forced to navigate shifting allegiances, confidential information, and volatile personalities. Their own loyalty, judgment, and discretion were tested to the extreme. Some were drawn into the drama reluctantly, others strategically, but all played a role in shaping how the family would respond publicly. The emotional and logistical pressure on these individuals cannot be overstated. In a household where appearances are everything, the stakes are profoundly personal. Meanwhile, Harry's siblings and cousins had to contend with their own public perception. Every media appearance, every interview, and every social interaction was scrutinized, interpreted, and reinterpreted by both the press and the public. The emotional toll on these individuals, though less visible, was real. They were caught between supporting a brother, maintaining the dignity of the institution, and managing their own lives under constant observation. It is a reminder that when one member of the royal family makes a monumental decision, the ripple effects extend far beyond the immediate couple. Despite all this, there were moments of private reflection. Some family members reportedly attempted to reconcile their emotions with rational assessment, seeking to understand Harry's perspective while grappling with the implications for the monarchy. Others struggled, unable to reconcile the public spectacle with the private dynamics they had witnessed over the years. The mix of love, disappointment, pride, and confusion created a charged atmosphere that few outside the palace could comprehend. And in these moments, it became clear, the announcement was not just a turning point for Harry and Meghan, but a crucible for the family as a whole. The day progressed, the news spread, and public reactions compounded the pressure. International media covered every nuance, social media exploded with debate, and commentators speculated endlessly about the family's next move. But inside the palace, the focus remained on containment, on understanding, and on planning. Each family member, advisor, and staff member had a role to play in ensuring that this unprecedented event did not spiral into chaos. The balancing act was delicate, emotionally taxing, and fraught with the potential for misstep. Yet even amidst the intense planning, a sense of inevitability lingered. The fractures between personal desire and institutional expectation, between Harry's autonomy and family duty, had long been present. The announcement did not create these tensions. It merely exposed them in the most public way possible. For the royal family, the reaction was not just about managing a crisis. It was about facing a long-standing reality that had been quietly shaping family dynamics for years. And then came word of a secret meeting, arranged at the last minute, where senior advisors and select family members would convene to determine the next steps. The room, a private chamber rarely used for such discussions, reportedly buzzed with anticipation and tension. Everyone knew that what was decided in that room could set the course for the monarchy's public image, the handling of Harry and Meghan's announcement, and the emotional fallout for the family itself. All eyes were on this meeting, but the outcomes were anything but predictable. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What did Meghan Markle feel the moment she heard the world knew before she did? What was going through her mind as millions across the globe digested Prince Harry's shocking declaration that their marriage was over? For Meghan, the experience was unlike anything she had encountered, a collision of personal betrayal, public scrutiny, and intense emotional upheaval that no one, not even a seasoned former actress accustomed to media attention, could navigate with ease. And yet, it is precisely in these unseen moments, away from cameras and staged appearances, that the full complexity of her reaction unfolds. Sources close to Meghan report that her initial response was shock. Not the kind of shock that fades with time, but the visceral, stomach-twisting shock that leaves a person momentarily paralyzed. The announcement had not been communicated to her in advance in the way she had expected, leaving her blindsided in a way that was deeply personal and publicly humiliating. Imagine receiving news about a life-altering decision, broadcast on every channel, dissected by millions, while you are left processing the reality in private. The emotional dissonance is almost impossible to overstate. Immediately following the announcement, Meghan reportedly retreated into a quiet, private space, seeking the counsel of trusted advisors and friends. These confidants, many of whom had been supporting her through years of public scrutiny and personal pressure, observed a range of emotions: disbelief, hurt, anger, and, most strikingly, a fierce determination. Unlike some portrayals in the media, Meghan's reaction was not passive. It was active, strategic, and deeply calculated. She understood the power of narrative, the influence of perception, and the importance of maintaining composure even in the face of personal turmoil. Sources suggest that Meghan's initial hours were spent absorbing every detail of the announcement, cross-referencing what Harry had said with what she knew privately. In her mind, every word, every phrasing carried subtext. There was the shock of hearing their personal matter made public, the sting of a narrative controlled by someone else, and the challenge of considering how this revelation would impact not only her own public image but the image of their children, the monarchy, and herself as an individual. The emotional landscape was complex, grief intertwined with strategic calculation, hurt mingling with resolve. What is particularly fascinating is the contrast between Meghan's private and public responses. While the cameras captured poised, measured appearances in subsequent public settings, insiders note that behind the scenes, her emotional journey was far more turbulent. Moments that seemed calm or neutral in public were, in private, rife with internal deliberation and self-examination. Her interactions with staff, advisors, and family members during this period reveal layers of processing, questioning, and strategizing that were not visible to the public eye. Every gesture, every decision, was filtered through a lens of unprecedented scrutiny and high stakes. According to close sources, Meghan also experienced a wave of anger, though it was controlled, strategic, and purposeful. This was not uncontrolled rage, but a measured response to the sudden exposure and perceived betrayal. She reportedly asked hard questions of those around her. Why had she not been informed sooner? Was Harry attempting to control the narrative? How would this affect her children, her reputation, and the causes she championed? The questions were both practical and deeply emotional, reflecting her dual role as a mother and public figure. It is also reported that Meghan's anger was tinged with a sense of isolation. Even in a world where she is constantly surrounded by staff, advisors, and public figures, the nature of her predicament was uniquely personal. No one could fully experience the shock, the betrayal, or the strategic calculation she faced. She was, in many ways, alone, tasked with processing a life-altering revelation under the microscope of global attention. Yet, it is precisely this isolation that reportedly strengthened her resolve, pushing her to think several steps ahead, anticipating both public and private consequences. Meghan's support network played a critical role in these moments. Advisors and friends encouraged her to maintain control, to carefully navigate each decision, and to ensure that her perspective was heard amidst the media frenzy. Sources close to the situation note that this support was both emotional and tactical. Friends helped her manage stress, anticipate media narratives, and plan her next moves in a way that preserved both personal dignity and public credibility. Every conversation, every piece of advice, was layered with strategy, underscoring the complex interplay between personal emotion and public perception. Interestingly, insiders report that Meghan oscillated between self-reflection and action. She revisited past conversations, trying to understand whether there had been signs she had missed, moments that might have indicated Harry's growing dissatisfaction. She analyzed their relationship history, seeking patterns that could provide insight into his decision. This reflective phase was reportedly intense, filled with emotional highs and lows, but it also enabled her to approach the situation with clarity, balancing emotion with pragmatism. One particularly revealing element of her reaction, according to sources, was a focus on legacy. Meghan reportedly considered not only the immediate fallout, but also the long-term implications for herself, her children, and the public narrative. How would this decision affect the causes she championed? What precedent did it set for women navigating institutions dominated by tradition and hierarchy? How could she maintain agency in a story that had, for so long, been partially written by others? These questions illustrate the depth and breadth of her thinking, revealing a woman who navigates emotion and strategy with equal weight. Yet, despite the strategic thinking, there were moments of raw, unfiltered emotion. Private conversations reveal tears, moments of vulnerability, and flashes of frustration at the unfairness of the situation. But unlike portrayals in some media narratives, these moments did not define her actions. Instead, they became fuel, providing the emotional clarity and urgency to act decisively while managing public perception. It is this balance between vulnerability and calculated response that has allowed Meghan to navigate one of the most unprecedented situations in modern royal history. Another key aspect of Meghan's reaction was anticipation. Sources indicate that she immediately began considering potential public responses, legal implications, and media strategies. She reportedly asked advisors to prepare statements, draft messaging, and explore options that would allow her to assert her perspective while avoiding unnecessary escalation. This anticipatory thinking underscores her awareness that, in a scenario of this magnitude, inaction could be interpreted as weakness or acquiescence. Every move mattered, and every potential outcome had to be considered. Amidst all this, Meghan also turned her focus to her family. The impact on their children was central to her thoughts, shaping her decisions and responses. She reportedly sought to shield them from the immediate fallout, while simultaneously preparing for the long-term realities of a life altered by public revelation. These concerns, deeply personal yet inextricably linked to the public stage, illustrate the multidimensional pressure she faced, balancing motherly responsibility, personal autonomy, and public scrutiny. Perhaps most revealing are the contradictions within her own reactions. On one hand, there was hurt and a sense of betrayal. On the other, there was resolve and strategic calm. On one hand, there was grief for the sudden fracture of private life. On the other, a calculated anticipation of public perception and narrative control. These contradictions, rather than signifying confusion, highlight the complexity of her emotional intelligence, the ability to feel deeply while acting deliberately, to navigate human emotion while managing a global stage. Finally, insiders note that Meghan's perspective was marked by a desire for transparency, within reason. She reportedly recognized that secrecy, obfuscation, or avoidance would only exacerbate tensions, both personal and public. Yet, she also understood the risks of overexposure, of providing too much detail too soon. This balancing act, between disclosure and discretion, emotion and strategy, defined her approach in the hours, days, and weeks following Harry's announcement. In the end, Meghan's unseen reactions reveal a woman confronting unprecedented circumstances with a blend of emotion, strategy, and resilience. The announcement of divorce was not merely a personal upheaval. It was a catalyst, compelling her to navigate public scrutiny, familial expectation, and private emotion simultaneously. Every thought, every decision, every pause was informed by the tension between human vulnerability and the demands of global attention. And as Meghan began to respond, to plan, and to assert herself, one thing became clear. The story was far from over, and the next moves would define not only her public image but the trajectory of the monarchy itself. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. How does the world react when one of the most powerful couples in modern history announces a personal rupture? Within minutes of Prince Harry's declaration, the media machine went into overdrive. Headlines exploded across newspapers, online outlets, and social media platforms. Every word, every inflection, every nuance of the announcement was dissected, analyzed, and sensationalized. For millions, this was not just a story. It was an event, a spectacle that blended human drama with the intricacies of one of the most scrutinized families on the planet. But the frenzy was far more than surface-level reporting. It became a mirror reflecting public perception, bias, and fascination, and it revealed just how high the stakes had become. The first wave of coverage hit like a tidal wave. British tabloids led the charge, with bold, emotionally charged headlines that left no room for subtlety. Royal shock. Harry ends marriage with Meghan, screamed one front page. Duchess left devastated, claimed another. Across the pond, American media framed the story through a lens of celebrity culture, focusing on Meghan's persona and Harry's rebellion against tradition. Social media amplified these narratives exponentially. Tweets, posts, memes, and hashtags flooded feeds worldwide. Within hours, the story was trending globally, sparking debates, speculation, and outrage. What's critical to understand is the speed at which misinformation, half-truths, and speculation spread. Within minutes, the narrative began to fragment. One outlet would claim the divorce was the result of irreconcilable differences. Another suggested a clandestine palace intervention. A third framed it as a personal betrayal with strategic undertones. Viewers and readers were bombarded with competing versions of reality, creating confusion and amplifying emotion. For Harry and Meghan, this public storm was unavoidable, and every move they made, or didn't make, was scrutinized for signs of guilt, regret, or strategic brilliance. The public reaction, meanwhile, was a volatile mix of empathy, judgment, and fascination. Fans of the couple expressed shock and sadness, mourning what they saw as a fractured fairy tale. Critics, however, seized the moment to cast aspersions, framing the announcement as yet another example of royal drama fueled by ego and rebellion. Social media became a battleground. Heated debates unfolded in comment sections, Twitter threads exploded with speculation, and Instagram posts sparked viral commentary. The intensity was unprecedented, the global attention relentless. Every emotional spike, from anger to sympathy, fueled the media's appetite for more, creating a feedback loop that magnified the story exponentially. What made this media frenzy particularly remarkable was the level of emotional investment from the public. It wasn't merely curiosity or celebrity gossip. It was a deep, almost personal engagement with the lives of Harry and Meghan. The couple had spent years cultivating visibility, crafting narratives that intertwined personal stories with public causes, and this announcement became a flashpoint where private emotion collided with public obsession. People weren't just consuming news. They were participating emotionally, projecting feelings, judgments, and hopes onto a story that had, until now, been carefully curated. The media, of course, thrived on contradiction. Articles highlighted Meghan's poise while simultaneously questioning her loyalty. Headlines lauded Harry's courage while framing him as impulsive or reckless. Every angle was exploited, every contradiction magnified. This duality created an intense psychological effect on the audience, pulling them into a narrative that was simultaneously sympathetic and scandalous. Readers and viewers were left with cognitive dissonance. They were expected to understand the human vulnerability of the individuals involved while also consuming the spectacle of their public drama. Insiders report that the couple's friends and advisors were inundated with inquiries from journalists around the globe. Phones rang incessantly, messages piled up, and the pressure to provide clarity or strategically withheld statements became immense. Sources close to the family described this period as a whirlwind of communication, rumor, and speculation, where even well-intentioned information could quickly spiral out of control. The constant attention, coupled with conflicting reports, intensified both personal stress and public tension, creating a media storm that few could navigate with poise. Even more striking were the social media dynamics. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok became arenas for debate, speculation, and the amplification of every minor detail. Memes spread rapidly, often blending humor with sharp criticism. Viral videos dissected interviews and public appearances, analyzing micro-expressions, pauses, and gestures for signs of emotion or deceit. The public's engagement was instantaneous and global, creating a sense that the couple's personal lives were now not only under scrutiny, but also subject to collective judgment and interpretation on a massive scale. Interestingly, the media frenzy wasn't uniform in tone. While British tabloids often emphasized scandal, conflict, and palace intrigue, international outlets tended to frame the story within broader cultural narratives. American media highlighted celebrity dynamics and Meghan's public persona. European outlets focused on the implications for the monarchy, and Asian media explored cultural contrasts in royal behavior. This global lens added layers of complexity, making the announcement not just a domestic event, but an international phenomenon with political, cultural, and social resonance. Moreover, the frenzy generated unexpected consequences for public perception. Some reports suggested that Harry's decision could inspire sympathy, portraying him as a man asserting personal agency against tradition and expectation. Other narratives emphasized dysfunction, portraying both Harry and Meghan as contributors to a narrative of royal chaos. The dichotomy of reactions illustrates the media's power not just to inform, but to shape public consciousness, to manipulate emotion, and to amplify tension. In this environment, every gesture, every statement, and every pause was scrutinized for its potential to influence perception. The media also capitalized on secrecy, leaks, and speculation. Anonymous sources, often identified as palace insiders or friends, were quoted extensively, sometimes with contradictory claims. Reports of private conversations, secret meetings, and internal memos proliferated, fueling a sense of immediacy and intrigue. For the audience, this created a thrill of perceived insider access. Readers and viewers felt they were seeing behind the curtain, witnessing the truth, even as the reality was layered, mediated, and often incomplete. This mixture of access and uncertainty heightened engagement, keeping audiences hooked and emotionally invested. Public outrage, too, became a key factor. Online platforms were flooded with commentary ranging from support to vitriol. Discussions about Meghan's character, Harry's choices, and the monarchy's role in personal lives dominated forums and comment sections. Every misinterpreted gesture or ambiguous phrase became evidence in a global trial conducted by millions of people simultaneously. The speed and intensity of response amplified emotion, creating a pressure cooker environment where even small missteps could become viral controversies. Despite the chaos, some analysts argue that the media frenzy served a strategic function. It reinforced the stakes of the announcement, amplified the emotional stakes for the public, and positioned both Harry and Meghan as central figures in a narrative that blended personal drama with historical significance. By controlling, or attempting to control, the narrative, the couple could influence perception, assert agency, and navigate a complex intersection of personal emotion and public scrutiny. Every media appearance, statement, or leak was a chess move in a high-stakes game with global audiences as witnesses. Yet, as intense as the coverage was, the most fascinating aspect may have been the contradictions it revealed. Some outlets depicted Meghan as a passive figure, blindsided and reactive, while others portrayed her as calculating, strategic, and assertive. Harry was simultaneously cast as a hero, a rebel, and an impulsive disruptor. These conflicting narratives illustrate the difficulty of conveying nuance in a media landscape driven by emotion, attention, and sensationalism. Audiences were drawn to the story not only because of the facts, but because of the uncertainty, the tension, and the dramatic contradictions that emerged at every turn. As the frenzy continued, the emotional stakes grew. Fans expressed heartbreak and concern. Critics expressed outrage and judgment, and the couple themselves were navigating a maelstrom that few outside could comprehend. The media, social media, and public reaction created a feedback loop of tension, speculation, and emotional intensity, making every decision, every appearance, and every statement a delicate balancing act. The announcement was no longer just a private rupture. It had become a public spectacle with unprecedented global attention. And then came the leaks, documents, emails, and insider quotes that painted conflicting pictures of the couple's private conversations, disagreements, and plans. Every revelation added fuel to the fire, intensifying public reaction and increasing pressure on the royal family to respond. The media frenzy was no longer just reporting. It was actively shaping the story, influencing perception, and escalating tension at a pace that outstripped the couple's ability to manage it. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Divorce is never just personal. It is financial. And in the case of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the stakes could not have been higher. For most couples, divorce settlements involve splitting assets, dividing property, and negotiating support. For a royal couple whose wealth, holdings, and financial privileges are intertwined with centuries of tradition, public scrutiny, and institutional structure, the calculus becomes exponentially more complex. Suddenly, every asset, every investment, and every financial decision is magnified under the public microscope, and the consequences ripple far beyond personal fortune. They impact the monarchy itself, the public perception of wealth, and the sustainability of royal privilege in a modern world. The initial questions were immediate and urgent. What portion of income derived from the sovereign grant, which supports official duties, would be affected? How would private holdings, inherited wealth, and personal investments be allocated? What about the charitable foundations and joint ventures the couple had engaged in? Advisors, both royal and legal, were thrust into intense deliberation, analyzing the ramifications of decades of assets intertwined with a single marriage. Every scenario carried risk, and every calculation demanded precision. Misstep here could trigger public backlash, legal disputes, or even reputational damage for the monarchy at large. Sources close to the palace report that Harry's financial independence had long been a source of tension. While he and Meghan had moved toward private revenue streams, through media deals, brand partnerships, and speaking engagements, much of their wealth remained indirectly tied to the institution. The question of how to untangle these financial threads became a central point in post-announcement deliberations. For the royal family, ensuring that public funds were protected while managing the couple's autonomy was a delicate balancing act. Every decision carried implications for transparency, fairness, and public perception. Private advisors reportedly began mapping scenarios in which Harry and Meghan's assets could be separated without disrupting public funding. Trusts, personal estates, and inheritance structures were analyzed line by line. Legal teams examined precedent, though few cases in modern history mirrored the unique status of a royal couple divorced while still active in the public eye. The stakes were intense. Miscalculations could lead to lawsuits, international scrutiny, and a blow to the credibility of both the couple and the monarchy. Every decision required strategic foresight, emotional intelligence, and a keen understanding of global media impact. The financial stakes were personal as well. Harry, having stepped back from full-time royal duties, faced a recalibration of lifestyle and responsibilities. He was no longer fully shielded by institutional wealth or public protection. The announcement placed him in a position where personal fortune, investments, and career decisions were now central to survival and status. For Meghan, the calculation was equally fraught. Her public image, income potential, and ability to maintain her lifestyle in the midst of intense scrutiny were deeply intertwined with financial outcomes. Together, the couple faced a reality where private decisions were inseparable from public consequence. One particularly sensitive topic was the division of property. Reports suggest that the couple had acquired and maintained multiple residences, some partially funded by royal resources, others fully private. Determining ownership, occupancy, and future use became a logistical and legal puzzle. Each property carried symbolic weight as well. A home is not just a financial asset, but a representation of stability, identity, and public perception. Advisors reportedly debated options ranging from full buyouts to shared ownership, each choice fraught with potential controversy and emotional consequence. The charitable foundations operated by Harry and Meghan also added complexity. These ventures, intended to benefit public causes, were tied to both their public image and financial management. Questions arose about governance, fund allocation, and leadership. Could one party retain control without alienating supporters or creating legal entanglements? How would the dissolution of the marriage affect the sustainability and credibility of these initiatives? Every decision had to balance the needs of beneficiaries, the couple's intentions, and public accountability, creating layers of pressure that extended far beyond the personal sphere. Legal experts were consulted extensively. Divorce law for ordinary citizens is complex, but for royals, it is intertwined with constitutional precedent, institutional privilege, and public interest. Advisors examined every potential outcome: settlements, alimony, access to shared assets, and rights to media revenues. Precedents were sparse, and the public eye added another layer of scrutiny. In effect, each financial decision was simultaneously a legal negotiation and a public relations challenge, with no room for error. Insiders also note the emotional weight behind financial disputes. Money is never just numbers, it is power, security, and autonomy. For Harry, negotiations over assets were not merely about maintaining lifestyle. They were about asserting independence and protecting his family. For Meghan, financial clarity was about control over her life and the ability to continue initiatives and causes she believed in. The interplay of emotion and strategy transformed routine financial discussions into high-stakes encounters, where every calculation carried profound personal significance. Beyond property and investments, attention turned to income streams. Media deals, speaking engagements, and endorsements represented potential financial independence for the couple, but also public perception risks. Every announcement of a deal or partnership was analyzed for timing, optics, and impact on the divorce narrative. Advisors reportedly debated whether transparency in income was necessary, or whether discretion could mitigate criticism while protecting the couple's autonomy. The financial narrative, like the personal one, was now inseparable from public perception. The role of inheritance further complicated matters. Harry, as a son of the king, is entitled to certain assets and privileges that are intertwined with family hierarchy and historical precedent. Determining what portion of inheritance could be retained, allocated, or reconsidered in light of the divorce required careful legal and familial negotiation. Advisors weighed the implications for succession, precedent, and public perception. Even minor missteps in this realm could provoke scandal, inspire criticism, or create irreparable tension within the family. Financial media quickly seized on the story. Analysts debated the possible value of the couple's joint assets, estimating the net worth implications of their separation in vivid detail. Newspapers ran detailed breakdowns of property, investment, and potential settlements. Social media users shared analysis, speculation, and criticism. The intense public attention magnified pressure on the couple and their advisors, creating an environment in which every financial decision became a public spectacle. Despite the intensity, some reports suggest that Harry and Meghan approached financial negotiations pragmatically. They reportedly prioritized the future of their children, the sustainability of their charitable initiatives, and the preservation of dignity in the public eye. But even pragmatic approaches were fraught with tension. Every decision risked misinterpretation, misrepresentation, or miscommunication, creating a delicate balance between transparency and discretion, autonomy and accountability. And then there were the unforeseen consequences. Early leaks hinted at clauses, trusts, or agreements that could be activated in ways no one had anticipated. Advisors scrambled to assess potential risks, lawyers drafted contingency plans, and family members debated strategic responses. The financial fallout, while technical in nature, was deeply intertwined with emotion, power, and legacy. For the royal family, it was not just a divorce. It was a test of institutional resilience, of ability to manage unprecedented personal and financial disruption while maintaining global credibility. As the days unfolded, the media amplified every financial detail, real or speculative, feeding into public perception and heightening scrutiny. Every leak, every speculation, and every rumor became an element in a global narrative where personal wealth and family legacy were inextricably linked. For Harry and Meghan, the stakes extended far beyond personal comfort. They had the delicate task of navigating not just a divorce, but a financial and public reckoning with consequences that could resonate for decades. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Who can you trust when the entire world is watching? When a couple like Harry and Meghan faces a seismic personal upheaval, the lines between friend, confidant, and betrayer blur in ways most people can't imagine. Allies become instruments of strategy, whispers in the wrong ears become headlines, and the most intimate relationships are suddenly subject to scrutiny, speculation, and suspicion. This was the world Harry and Meghan entered after the announcement, a private battlefield overlaid with a public spectacle where every word, glance, and text message could be weaponized. The first layer of complexity lay in the inner circle of advisors. For years, Harry and Meghan had cultivated a network of trusted friends, aides, and counselors, individuals who knew both their personal vulnerabilities and their strategic aims. These confidants were expected to guide, support, and protect them, but the intense pressure of the announcement transformed allies into players in a high-stakes game. Some advisors remained loyal, prioritizing discretion and emotional support, but others found themselves in morally ambiguous positions, balancing loyalty to the couple with obligations to the monarchy, the media, or personal interest. Sources report that early interactions were charged with tension. Trusted friends who had witnessed private conversations were suddenly faced with the dilemma of speaking out, staying silent, or mediating between parties whose emotions ran hot. Some tried to provide context to the media, offering statements to frame the narrative favorably, while others acted as buffers, attempting to prevent minor miscommunications from escalating. Every action, intentional or otherwise, carried weight, and the potential for misinterpretation was immense. Betrayal, in this context, was rarely dramatic. It was subtle, cumulative, and devastating. A casual comment relayed to a journalist. A private opinion shared in confidence and reported publicly. A strategic misstep by a well-meaning friend that inadvertently revealed more than intended. Each instance chipped away at trust, leaving the couple increasingly cautious in whom they confided. It is in these moments, insiders suggest, that the cracks in personal alliances became apparent. Relationships once thought unshakable were tested in ways that revealed vulnerability, loyalty, and personal interests simultaneously. Family dynamics added further complexity. Some relatives, perhaps out of concern or frustration, became inadvertent informants, sharing details of private conversations or decisions in ways that escalated public speculation. Friends outside the family network interpreted loyalty differently, some prioritizing public reputation over personal discretion, others advocating for emotional transparency at the cost of privacy. The overlapping spheres of influence created a web of interaction in which every choice could be both helpful and harmful. A particularly illuminating example involved a confidant who had long served as a sounding board for Meghan. This individual, while loyal, was caught in a delicate balance, attempting to support Meghan's perspective while also managing information that had implications for Harry's relationship with the royal family. Missteps occurred when statements meant to reassure were interpreted by media sources as evidence of division or conflict, feeding the frenzy of speculation. For Meghan, this was a stark reminder that even trusted allies could inadvertently, or intentionally, become conduits for exposure. Harry, too, experienced subtle betrayals within his own circle. Sources indicate that early reactions from certain advisors were tinged with judgment or allegiance to the institutional status quo. Words of caution were interpreted by Harry as disloyalty, and attempts to mediate were